Well, hello everyone. Welcome to week 4 of Brain-Based Research. Happy Monday. I hope you had a fabulous weekend. And here we are together again. The class is already halfway through, moving quickly. And based on your discussion board comments, I see that you're finding it as fascinating as I find it fascinating to teach. So I wanted to bring up some of the discussion board comments before I moved on today. And I'm just going to go out of order, what I found interesting as I was reading through. I could post notes in the discussion board, but then we don't really get to have a conversation about it. So I always like to put something in the video about it. So Marilyn, you were talking about how subjects in isolation, how you don't like that, kids can see that as an isolated thing, and you like to see the cross-curricular. And that's exactly what we want to do. And when we are working with right brain and left brain learners, if we're working with students who aren't making those global connections, then this is an opportunity for us to teach them how to make those global connections. So that if you're working in English, find a way to tie it to history or science or math or any of the subjects. If you're working in math, find a way to tie it to English or science or history. And it doesn't mean that you have to do this big, grand lesson. It just means that while you're teaching, if an opportunity arises for you to be able to make one of those global connections, then what's really cool is one day those kids will be in one of those classes and suddenly they'll hear that connection you made, and they'll usually bring it up to their teacher in some way. And for those of us that have been teaching for a gazillion years, 20, 25, 30 years, we know that students will often come back and tell you about this connection they made or email you about it. And now with social media, they post it. I just had a student go on a trip to Salem, Massachusetts. I teach American history literature, and we always do, of course, the Crucible and the Salem witch trials. And I show them visuals of the area, and I talk about my experiences going there, traveling. And I had a student who's about 26 now, and she just hadn't spoken to me. We hadn't talked about anything. And then all of a sudden, she just posted on her board, "Here I am in Salem, a trip I've been longing to take since I had Miss Wood's class." And, I had her as a student when she was 16. So we don't know when those impacts are going to happen. I had a student the other day bring up a connection. They were in a college class and somebody started talking once again about the Crucible and Salem and that. And they were able to rattle off all of this information, and their teacher was quite impressed. And they said something about, the connection. So we never know where that connection is going to happen or when. And our job, our responsibility, is to put the spark there. And as well as I do, some kids aren't ready for what we're teaching at that time, or find it interesting, or seem to care. And oftentimes we don't think that we are making a difference, but we are. And just because somebody's quiet or doesn't say anything about it doesn't mean that we aren't. And so anytime you get those chances to kind of show them how your brain works, how you make connections, then that's really good modeling. And it's a way to stop that isolation between subjects. Paul, you brought up two things that I thought were really interesting. One, the thinking maps resistance, the central government type of idea. And I agree with you. We did thinking maps many years ago in middle school, and I'm sure my elementary school and my middle school teachers, you're probably using them still, and in high school, we've brought them to high school as well. But you know that the district has a tendency to get very gung-ho about something, and then they push it, and then they move past it, and then they find something new to get really excited about, and they push it. And once again, for those of us that have been teaching for a long time, we see that education is quite cyclical, and that anything old seems to come back new again with a new name. And so thinking maps, I can understand your resistance for that. And I don't suggest that people use them for everything. I think it's like anything. You can't just do it all the time just to do it. I think you're right, Paul. And I still see people, using all sorts of thinking maps in school. But one of my history teachers, he uses the Venn diagram quite a lot. And the other day I was covering his class. They were doing this really interesting video. And I'm sure, I know, Amy, you do world history, and Paul, you do, I think, American history. This really interesting video on Hitler and Stalin and the similarities between the two, their childhoods, their upbringings, these types of things. And the teacher had the video on, and he had the kids doing Venn diagrams, their thinking map with a Venn diagram, and that was perfect. That was more than enough, because it wasn't taking their attention away from the audio visual that they really needed to pay attention to. It was just quick, short bullet points they were writing, because we know that multitasking doesn't really work with kids. And if they're writing these big, long notes, when they come back to the video or the audio, they've missed a whole segment that they're not going to get. So I really liked that he was using the Venn diagram, and they were just writing brief bullet points as they were watching the video. But I understand your resistance, and I'm sure you've experienced this with the district. Another thing that you talked about, Paul, was about how you felt, languages shouldn't be started in high school, that's really too late to be doing it, and you're absolutely right. And we have a couple great programs in Long Beach Unified, and I'm sure other districts have it as well, where we now have preschoolers and kindergartners who are immersed in a second language in their school day. I mean, they are learning, they are speaking Spanish, English learners are speaking Spanish, and the whole lesson, the class, everything, you're completely immersed in Spanish. And I have two students, now 26, that are both musicians, signed to Sub Pop, traveling the world right now, doing a great job in music. But they are fluent in Spanish, and they were in that program. And I don't mean, like just fluent like school Spanish, I mean fluent. And there were some really funny incidents in my classroom. They're both very whitey white children. And one time people were speaking Spanish, believing that they could not understand them. And they were all in this like little group together. And suddenly these two turned around and just started fluently talking, and everybody in the class was like, whoa, kind of surprised. And but amazing Spanish speakers, beautiful Spanish speakers. That helps so much with just life, to be bilingual, and the opportunities that opens for them, and especially in world traveling, the people that they have been able to speak to in South America and have these real authentic experiences because they've been immersed in this second language since kindergarten. So something to think about for sure. Carrie, you had brought up the Mark Twain assignment, which I thought was fantastic. And in high school, we do a thing in Compass, because it's a music performers, artists, social scientist thing, where we do arts-based projects. And it reminded me of my time that my theatrical student, Jackson, did the whole Hal Holbrook Mark Twain theatrical performance instead of writing a paper on Twain or what we were doing. He said, may I do this in lieu of doing this other project? And it was such an authentic experience, and unbelievable time and effort he put into it, and the kids just loved learning about Twain that way. Christina, you also did, Susan was talking about your Hatchet unit, which I love Hatchet. And I love the whole cross-curricular, idea of that, everything that you can learn from that book. And anybody in this class that's not familiar with Hatchet, if you get a chance to read it, it's fantastic. It's about a little boy who crashes in the wilderness of Canada, and all he has is this hatchet that he's gotten for his birthday, and he has to survive. Christina, I don't know if you know that there's about 6 books in the Hatchet series now. So you can move forward with that project if you'd like to. And Gary Polson also wrote a series of nonfiction stories about his real life in the wilderness called Guts. And that's a fun one to add in. But I love the Hatchet series, and it's a great cross-curricular connection. Amy, you brought up the Harkness method. You were telling somebody about that and asked if they had used it. That's been around since the early 1900s, and for people that aren't familiar with it, it works really well with small groups. So, if you see those videos, I'm thinking The Good Shepherd right now, which I don't know if you've seen that movie, but there's a professor sitting at the end of a table, and it's like, a regular cafeteria, size table with about 9 to 10 students sitting around it, and they're having discussion about literature. So in the Harkness method, it does work better with smaller groups than with larger groups. So if you find a way, if you're doing some type of station work in your class where maybe you've got kids collaborating on learning in one corner and kids, working on computers in the other, or even if you had the whole class working, say, on Chromebooks or something, and you wanted to talk to this small group, you're basically having your students, it's kind of like a mini TED Talk where they're allowed to think and discuss with minimal teacher activity. You interject at times. But the only thing with the Harkness method that you have to remember is that some kids are very shy in those situations, especially where it's such a small group of people. And people can think that they're not paying attention or they're not contributing. And so for kids with anxiety and stress about those types of things, you might want to take that into consideration and maybe find another way. But it is a great way of being able to listen to a small group of your students discuss and pop ideas off each other with you just kind of sitting back as a facilitator and maybe adding in here and there. Miranda and Natalie, you had talked about strategies related to ELs and IEPs, and you're absolutely right. All of the things that we do with our EL students are fantastic for everybody in brain-based learning. And when I used to teach ELs many years ago, I had students coming over from Russia and Vietnam and Korea with absolutely no English in my class. And visuals, auditory, music, being very personable, hand gestures, those types of things, all of those things help kids to engage. And once again, this comes back to the left brain and the right brain, that we want to add all of these different activities in our class for visual learners, tactile learners, audio learners. It's our way of differentiating instruction, not only for instructional level, but also for learning styles. Let's see. Just a couple more people here. Adriana, I love that you did the brain break in your class. And Miranda, your yearbook story about the eye-raising email, oh, I feel for you. And, that's just something that happens sometimes in education. I actually had a student just recently, it was funny but inappropriate. On his Instagram, the teacher that's handling like the uniform at our school, I guess, was sending out numerous emails about it. And my student screenshotted this part of this guy's email about uniforms once again, put it up on Instagram and wrote, "Congratulations, Mr. So-and-so, you win the redundant email award." And I was like, oh my gosh, and I know it's Instagram, it's his own private account. He can do what he wants, but there was something about it that just made me go, oh boy, I understand what you're saying about technology and the Chromebooks, and it can be terrifying. And you doing yearbook, I do yearbook as well. We run with that fear of, oh my gosh, is there anything in the book that somebody's hid, that they've done something terribly wrong that we're going to find out after the fact, after it's published. But don't let that discourage you. You can always find a way to use that as a good learning lesson for the students. And let's see. Oh, and Carrie, you had commented about Natalie's comment in the discussion board, which I totally agree with. And Natalie, great comment. Strive to provide guidance, then step back. And that's all we can do. And, it's such a cliche to say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But the fact of the matter is you can't. If anybody tried anything with me when I was in high school, they would have never gotten through. I was just not in that place in my life. I left high school in 10th grade. I started college when I was 16. I was not having anything to do with high school. So I look back at myself now and I just think, God, you're such an ass. But, nothing would have worked. A person comes to education when they're ready to come to education. And all we can do is provide the best experiences we can, be the best educators we can be, and do what we can to navigate our students' learning styles to help them find interest and success in our classroom. So I'm already going very long. That was 14 minutes. Have a wonderful week. Grades will be posted this afternoon. I'm done grading, but grades will be posted this afternoon. And if you need me, please feel free to get hold of me. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.